and let folks continue to join. So just first, want to thank everyone for joining us for today's session, AI That Works, How to Build the Right Foundation for Success. I'm Sarah. I am the VP of Marketing at Atlantic, and I will be playing the role of host for today. So before we jump into the good stuff, I just want to run through a few housekeeping items. This will be a 45-minute presentation. It will include a live demo, and then also we'll carve out some time at the end for any questions that you may have. But we do want this to be an interactive session. So if you have questions as we go, feel free to go ahead and drop them into the question box. I'll be monitoring that, and I'll interject as the questions are relevant to the discussion. And then we are recording this session, so we will send a copy of both the slides and the recording to you via email. You'll likely see that in your inbox tomorrow morning. So let's just jump into talk about what we're planning to cover today. So we're going to start with the state of AI, kind of where we are today, right? Like over the last year, 2 years, it's been AI, AI, AI. So where did we start? Where are we today? And where are we going? So really, in terms of talking about where we're going, talking about more of the AI agents. So the shift from generative AI to AI that takes action. And then we'll walk through a framework for success, really a 4-step process. And then we will spend some time actually taking a look at AI agents in action. So Tony will walk us through some demos. And then again, we'll have some time for Q&A, and then we'll talk about what makes sense in terms of your next steps. Where do you go from here, right? So with that, let me turn it over to today's speakers to introduce themselves.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Excited to be here today, and thanks everybody for joining us. Excited for kind of an interactive session like Sarah mentioned, but just want to introduce myself. I'm Jordan Berry. I'm the General Manager of the Data and Analytics Division within Atlantic. Obviously, we're experiencing a lot of data needs, analytics needs, and a lot of AI excitement. So we're excited to talk about that today as well.
Great, and I'm Tony Berry. I'm Director of Business Development Atlantic, and echoing what Jordan is saying, is I talk a lot with customers and kind of solution sets, and I think AI is the beginning and end of most conversations today, so we're looking forward to sharing some of that with everybody. And yes, we do have the same last name. We used to tease that we were brothers, but you can probably tell that's not the case. So.
What do you mean?
What do you mean? I'm a gray hair, so that probably makes it obvious, right?
All right. Well, before we jump in, we do have a poll question just to gauge where everyone is. So just share, where are you? How ready do you feel like your organization is for AI? Whether you're executing a well-defined AI strategy, maybe you have a strategy, but there's gaps. Maybe, you just started playing around with AI tools, but you're not sure where to go from there. Or you may be in the process of developing a strategy, or you're just starting to explore. So go ahead. I'll give folks a few seconds to select your response, and we'll see where we lie before we jump in. Okay. All right. Any guesses, Tony and Jordan, where people might be? I'm cheating because I can see as they're coming in.
The second or the fourth one is my guess.
Yeah. I bet we've got a really experienced audience in the mix.
Oh, there you go.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share the results. So it looks like we have a mix between just starting to explore and we're starting to use the tools. But yeah, majority exploring, starting to use the tools, which is not is similar to, I think, what we'll be talking about where a lot of companies are today, right?
I think so.
Okay, over to you, Jordan.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Sarah. I think that's a great backdrop just to see everybody kind of that bell curve of, folks that are early in the journey, some that are, deep in it, and then those that are really kind of out in the frontier. And so did just want to kind of touch base on the state of AI as we dive into some of the more tactical elements of agents and those types of things. But one of the studies that just came out recently, and it's a little bit of an about face compared to the MIT study that got a lot of headlines just about 2 months ago. But Wharton came out with a study in October focused around generative AI. They surveyed about 800 business leaders over the course of 2 years from 2023 to 2025. And really what they found is that AI is actually not something that's just getting stuck in pilots, but it's really getting incorporated into the enterprise. And so their finding is that 74% of enterprises are seeing actual positive ROI in their investments in AI and generative AI. And that's both productivity, speed, and even quality of the work that they're producing. They found that 82% of leaders are using it at least weekly, with nearly half using it daily. So, rather than it being kind of a nice to have tool that's tapped every once in a while, this is becoming an integrated part of most leaders' workflow. And about 70% or so have opened up access to all employees. And so I think that's kind of interesting, is that, when we surveyed our clients about, a year or two ago, folks were investing in Copilot licenses. They were just getting started, but we're seeing a wave that's surpassing, that 50% mark, where most are starting to leverage generative AI capabilities. So kind of the takeaway is that, today, in our seat, we're saying that Gen AI is really officially part of the mainstream. It's part of our operational toolkit. And so excited to kind of talk about how we go from kind of theory and, future state to how can you actually leverage these tools today in a really impactful way. But one thing I did want to notice and recognize that Wharton did as well is that we all are probably feeling the AI fatigue a bit as well. I think every conversation for the last 24 months has started and ended with AI, to use Tony's term. and really, it's a bit overwhelming in the sense that every day there's new headlines, there's new investments, there's new models, there's new techniques, things are being deprecated in real time. And so at the same time that we're seeing this great ROI, this great adoption from enterprises, we are seeing that training budgets are shrinking, confidence in upskilling is falling, trying to find the right talent, it's getting scooped up by some of the larger players versus being, evenly spread throughout the ecosystems. And there's a little bit of that morale challenge in terms of how do you get folks to, understand, right at the moment that AI is becoming, very practical and having a significant impact, we're having this cultural shift that maybe, we're a little bit fatigued, a little bit worn out in terms of, our energy and enthusiasm around adopting these tools. So kind of the challenge, I think what we'll talk about today is as leaders of our organizations, how do we not only, align on the technology, but align the entire firm around the upside and the ROI that we're seeing, from this revolutionary shift in the way that we work. And so that was the Wharton study, but we did want to just highlight, kind of the key reasons that we see AI initiatives failing. And I won't read this whole list, but if you just take a look, one of the key ones that I like to highlight is kind of POC paralysis. We're seeing a lot of what I call kind of random acts of AI. Folks are trying things in different ways. They're trying different tools. They're piloting things, which is not necessarily a bad strategy, but without that intentionality, without that investment, imagine if you were just to go try 7 different CRM tools, you're likely not going to invest in any particular one. You're probably not going to get those up and running. The same thing holds true in the AI world. And so, whether it's fragmented investment across different tools and technologies, whether this is really an IT only function where you're not pulling in the business users that understand the actual pain points of the organization, maybe you're concerned about some of the risks and the challenges of a non-deterministic approach that AI takes, or even that talent gap that we talked about. Kind of all these key elements drive back to you need a holistic strategy to accomplish this. It's not a simple, easy button, one and done, buy the tool and you're finished. You've really got to think about this as an organization and how it's going to transform, the way that you work.
It was that saying, with great power comes great responsibility. I think it was some science fiction thing. But the other thing I was going to mention there too is Jordan just came back from a show last week, and we're hearing a lot about shadow IT and weak governance. So even though those are at the bottom of the list, definitely something that we're encouraging people to think about, because there is a lot of power in these tools, but they also still need to be managed and governed.
And so did just want to touch on this is, okay, great. Some of the enterprises are starting to get hard ROI on this. We've got some fatigue, but we understand, the kind of pitfalls and how to get there. How do we scale AI with confidence? And really, I like this graphic because it encapsulates more than just the technology. Really, from our viewpoint, the way that you're successful with this technology is it's got to be executive led. There's got to be an understanding from the leaders of an organization that this is something that we are intending to adopt, that, this is not a maybe, this is an inevitable. And so then you've got to really think about how do you align kind of the core pillars of your business, whether that's culture, strategy, process, or particularly data. How do you put all these foundational elements in place such that you can support the AI? And only then, when you get to the bottom, can you kind of go through all these different functional areas of fostering that growth mindset, starting to enable non-technical users with some AI education, building that data foundation, which will be a really key element that we'll touch on later, aligning your processes, and then finally you really get to boost that efficiency and see the ROI of the AI. And I think back to that study, most of the enterprises, the larger organizations, had already done a lot of this heavy lifting, and so that's why they're able to really quickly shift and harness the power of AI. What we're seeing in the mid-market is that there may be some prerequisites that you need to go back and set up to be able to really tackle a lot of this stuff. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but to me, this is a horizontal enabling technology that requires the same level of acumen and detail to accomplish from an organizational standpoint. And so what are we talking about? I know Sarah kind of mentioned at the beginning, we don't want to just talk theory. We don't want to just talk about kind of general MBA type maxims. What is AI? How does it work? And so I kind of like this evolution just as a simplified way to think about AI. And we've probably all experienced the one on the left, kind of the retrieval aspects of AI. I've got a question, you give me an answer. Where most people get stuck is they can ask kind of general questions about the world. What's a recipe for this? How do I drive here? Et cetera. Now imagine asking questions about your business. Would it return the right answer? Does it know your sales from last year? Does it know your customers? Does it know, your policies and procedures? So there may be some roadblocks there. Now take it a little bit further in terms of, okay, I want the AI to actually do something for me. So maybe draft that email, build a proposal, et cetera. But as you start to go from task to schedule, imagine the AI actually working on your behalf when you're not at the computer. You go to bed at night and you'd like to come in the morning with the first draft of a proposal, the first draft of some sort of technical solution, architecture diagram. It may not be able to take you all the way, but almost think of it as kind of a digital offloading where you can schedule these things and then they're actually getting served back to you when you're not even at the computer. And if you take it all the way to the right, we're hearing a lot of talk about kind of autonomous AI, kind of similar to agentic, and the one that I've been hearing the most about is kind of ambient AI. And the idea here is that it's really understanding your, kind of OKRs, your objectives, where you're trying to go, and understands your ecosystem, and it's actually acting on your behalf to support that. So that's kind of the nirvana of what everybody's racing to. But I would argue most people are really getting stuck in step one and step two. Maybe they're experimenting with kind of step three. And so what we want to talk about today is how do you actually, get through these roadblocks, break through these hurdles, and move closer to the right side of this foundation rather than getting stuck at the very beginning. And so just a little bit more, factual data to back this up is they're doing a lot of forecasting, and what they're seeing when they're surveying enterprises is that these agents are really taking over. So not only is it, one agent, a lot of times we think about Copilot or ChatGPT, et cetera, but these are really, think of them as kind of point functional solutions. So, whether it's sales, marketing, service, whether it's other industries, thinking about all those little jobs to be done in your organization, each and every one of those can become an agent. So when you look at the horizon of this and the forecasts, IDC is projecting over 1.3 billion agents will be released into these IT ecosystems over the next couple of years. So going from let's say dozens today, maybe hundreds for certain orgs, to now thousands, it's a whole different way of work and something that we've all got to be aligned around. But the challenge is the ROI is real, like we saw in practice, and I think it's going to continue to expand. Is if you invest the dollars, invest the time, it will pay dividends from an enterprise value standpoint. So I think something that is just really exciting to me, because this is the moment where the early movers will get the lion's share of the benefit if you're able to take advantage of this technology. And like I touched on, the agents, they're transforming kind of, industries, functions. I like this graphic. I know it's just a little bit blurry if you're unable to see it, but really thinking about agents both from an industry standpoint, depending on which industry you're coming from. And I'd be curious in the audience, kind of the different types of, industry leaders we have, but you probably have very industry or kind of, focus area specific agents that would be beneficial for you, or it may be kind of functional needs, right? As you look at your different functional groups, how do they kind of align around the larger strategy? This is kind of priming us and setting us up for later as we start to talk about all these different use cases around AI. But I just want you to think about kind of, what are the ones that are unique to you? Every org has kind of the basic ones, right? I want to answer my email, my calendar. I want to understand kind of my daily workflow. But what's unique to you and your business? That's going to become really imperative as you think about how you implement these technologies in a way that actually separates you from the pack and kind of creates a unique competitive advantage for your organization.
And to me, Jordan, this is the fun part of AI, right? Is solving your specific areas, regardless of the function of the industry that you're in. And I think, Jordan, you'll agree. We've done the workshops. There's no lack of ideas or identification of use cases. So it's a fun exercise, really going through all these places that we all think AI can help.
Mm-hmm. And so as we think about agents, and I think Tony's spot on, is usually it's not the use cases that are the challenge. We all have these pain points in our daily workflow, as an organization, and usually the challenge becomes in the technical elements. And I think this is where some of that AI fatigue comes in. Is this is really early stage. Almost think back to the internet, where there weren't great standards, there weren't great protocols. Each provider is kind of offering a little bit, a different flavor of how these things come together. But what's really interesting to me, and I think it just happened really in Q3 calendar year of 2025, is a lot of these providers are now aligning on standards, on protocols, and we'll touch on a couple of those. But when you think about an agent, it's really as simple as there's some sort of input. That could be, that scheduled event that we talked about, a user message, or some other agent. We then bundle that with the large language model and some instructions. So, just like you would guide, somebody that's onboarding onto your team, here's how we do X, Y, and Z. You would bundle that with the LLM. And then kind of that key element that I mentioned that's been a lot of the pain points for folks is the tooling. So great, now that you understand the business, kind of the conditions, the policies, I want to now interact with my systems of record. So whether that's an ERP tool, a CRM tool, a marketing tool, I want to update a customer record. I want to start a campaign. I want to, send a follow-up for my sales activity. It's not even imagining anymore. It's now actioning. How do we create that, combination of things for the agent so that it can do that? At the end of it, you really get the result. You get to see what happened. It's a little bit from a professor academic standpoint, but one of the key things about AI is that it's what's called non-deterministic. So most of us are all used to deterministic software. When I say, what's the weather today, or how are you feeling today, on the outside, if I give it the same prompt, it'll give me the same result. AI is not that way. AI is non-deterministic in such that, if you give it a prompt, the result may change based on the environments, based on that run. And so you've got to figure out kind of how can you structure it in a way that it provides value, but stays within, the guardrails of what you're trying to accomplish as an organization. So pretty powerful, but I like this chart just because it really simplifies, what is an agent if you open up the hood and kind of see what the key elements of it are. And this is, talking about scholarly.
This is a scary slide. It's not technical people.
The idea for the audience is not necessarily to dig deep in this, but I just wanted to touch on kind of two different ways of how agents come together. Is great. We just talked about a single agent. Now let's say we've got a couple different agents, one that can do X, another that can do Y, that can do Z. I think what most people think about is on the left is this idea that we're just going to unleash these agents in our ecosystem. They're going to solve problems. They're going to figure it out on their own. Again, that's a human metaphor. That's like, imagine somebody without any onboarding. You just say, come on in. We gave you admin access to everything. You start pushing buttons, and we'll all be great. We recommend against that. That's a really high hill to climb, and I think that's where a lot of these pilots fail. What we're seeing a lot of success with is more on the right-hand side, which is your traditional workflow. When something happens, I want X to happen, and then once X is complete, do Y. So generate an outline, do some research, and then compile the answer. AI can actually just be part of that workflow. And so this is where we're seeing a lot of organizations get the most benefit today is, hey, I need to generate a draft of something. traditionally that had to get assigned to a person. Now the AI can take care of a lot of that natural language type work. And then once you've got this kind of foundation in place, then you can think about the more complex orchestrations. But really the scary chart is just a chance to show that there's a simpler way, something that we're all probably much more versed in. But thinking about just injecting AI in your current workflows is often a great place to start with these agentic capabilities. And so if I didn't hit you with enough information, we want to just boil it down. Let's simplify it. We talked about, the current state. We talked about agents. We talked about orchestrating agent teams. How should I think about this? This is a lot. We talked about that fatigue. Basically, when we boil it down to the simplest way to think about agents and agentic AI is basically there's 3 use cases. You can either make people more productive. So that's kind of the individual personal use case. And we can probably think about our day. What are all those moments in the day, what I like to call the time stealers? What are those things where if you didn't have to spend that extra hour pulling that data together or building that report or checking the status of something, if it was kind of more surfaced for you, how much more productive could you be? That's kind of the first category of AI use cases. And those usually come pretty natural to people, especially those that are in any sort of like customer service or sales or front office type function. I bet you they can 2-3 hands figure out how many use cases that they've got, pain points that they can figure out. The second category then is a little bit more in that team realm. So we've got these business processes that connect people, that help us drive value for our customers. Where are the inefficiencies? Where are things that again are a little bit more labor intensive, take time, need to be validated, and we need to coordinate across different functions or teams. That's often kind of the second place that agents can really help. We've seen things where, hey, traditionally this process may take us, 3 weeks and 60 hours of effort to start to finish. Agents can often bring that down by an order of 2, 3, 4, 5x depending on how much labor is in there. So now all of a sudden you're freeing your team up to focus on customer needs and client experiences rather than having to go input data or manage processes, those types of things. And then kind of the final category, just real quick before we jump to the how, is then you can actually inject AI into your products and services. And we're seeing a lot of this with kind of, software-based companies where, hey, they've got this new AI add-on, et cetera. But I would like to maybe challenge this group. If you're in kind of non-tech businesses, there's a lot of ways that you can actually help your customers engage with AI directly. And that makes you more valuable, makes you stickier. And so, that's kind of the third category. So if we simplify it all the way down, want to have everybody kind of keep this in your mind as we think about use cases, because this is really a really logical way to think about, the types of things that AI can help us with. And so, how do we get there? We talked about all the tools, the AI. We talked about kind of the use cases. How do we put that into action? And like we mentioned, a lot of firms are doing kind of random acts of AI. They're just, hey, we've got this list. We're going to try certain things. A lot of times that's driven by personal preference or whoever has bandwidth. We would argue that probably a more sophisticated approach to this is what's called the business envisioning framework. And this is not coming from us. This is actually part of a lot of research that the Microsoft teams have done, across thousands of organizations that are adopting these tools. And it really has 4 steps. It's got the initial envisioning, which we kind of touched on. What are those categories? What are the use cases? The solution envisioning, which is, okay, great, I know my use case. What does that look like in an agentic world? Back to that knowledge and tools and kind of environment. Then how do I actually architect this? And we'll kind of talk about from a Microsoft lens, what are the tools that you can use to architect and build this? And then how do you get it out in the world? Because one of the key things about AI that we're probably all experiencing is until you have that actual experience with it, it's really hard to tell whether or not it's going to meet the needs of the business, whether it's going to answer things at the fidelity that you want. And so the idea is, how do you compress the timeline from envisioning to prototype such that you can now get this in the world, get feedback? It feels very much like a software development lifecycle where you're going to launch V1, you're going to get some feedback, you're going to launch V2, get some more feedback, and so it's that constant kind of iterative process. And so we won't go through this whole thing today, but this is what we walk our clients through in a workshop format, is kind of getting from, what are these, broad list of use cases, and usually it's a list of 50, breaking that down in a way that we can actually prioritize them effectively. And so again, just to touch on it, this is not something we have time for today, but in the workshop setting, and that's something that I know we're happy to discuss with anybody on the call today, is we actually go through this canvas exercise where each person in the room has a chance to fill in a particular use case. It is just in observation amazing kind of seeing the types of ideas that people have in their mind. They've probably had them for 6 months. If only AI could do this, my job or my life would be that much easier, better, et cetera. And so just kind of unleashing this across a group within an organization can be really powerful. And it lets people kind of buy into the process, be a part of that identification of the use cases. So I'll just mention that having some structure to this is important, because otherwise you will get a broad swath of different approaches and ideas. This kind of grounds it in a consistent approach for all the attendees of that type of exercise. And so kind of as we're going through those 4 steps, we've gotten all these use cases. Rather than just stack ranking them and having somebody have their personal opinion, focus on where do we put our resources. Obviously, we don't have enough time to tackle all of these at once, right? And so this is what's called the BXT framework, the Business Experience and Technology Framework. And it's a kind of very intentional way to score those use cases so that you can understand which are the ones that we should fast track to prototype, which are the ones that we need to kind of incubate and understand a little bit more about, their use case and where they came from, and what are the ones that, sound great on paper, but just don't make business sense, and kind of shelving those for now until we can tackle some of the more impactful ones. So again, some of the exercising that we do in a workshop, but just wanted to raise that point because this is where we see a lot of firms stumble when they're trying to actually stack rank and prioritize, which use cases to tackle.
Yeah, and George, we just did this internally, and it's fascinating the results that come out. So it really makes this now, like Jordan said, this is a deterministic exercise here in terms of scoring these, because it really tells you where you can start, and like you said, things that you might want to hold off on for a little bit.
And so you may be able to kind of follow the bouncing ball here, right? Where we identified all those use cases, we stacked, ranked, and prioritized them. Now we've got our, let's say, top 2 or 3 use cases that we want to go build as a group or as a team. Now we've got to think about, okay, what does that solution look like? And so again, it's kind of that microscope zooming in a little bit further, is even for a particular AI use case, you then have to understand what are these drivers. So what is the data that the AI needs to engage with? How should the experience for this be? Is it in our existing tools? Is it a standalone experience? How technically challenging is this? Is this an internal or an external use case? Who are the users that will truly kind of get the value from this? How much is the return on investment? And then are there risks involved? And so this may feel, quite detailed, but the idea here is that you literally fill this out for each and every agentic use case, and this becomes the blueprint that then developers and configurers can use to actually build this out. And that's probably one of the biggest gaps that we see, is those that have this knowledge and those that are building the AI are often not the same. And so this is kind of the way that you translate a subject matter expert's understanding of the business, understanding the use case, into a way that someone that's building these agents can actually create something valuable and unique for the organization. So we're kind of zooming in, and then we'll actually pull back up a little bit to look at the tech that enables this for consumption. And so now that we've got the use case, we understand all the details on how to build it. Now we get to pick the tech. And so this is where a lot of people often start. And we flipped it on its head. We now know exactly what we want to build. Now we're just going to pick the right tool to build it. And like all things AI, we have choice, which can be, a little bit challenging, like the restaurant menu. Cheesecake Factory, maybe too many choices. We like the simple menu. But if you break it down, these are kind of the core enabling technologies. And Tony, I'll maybe let you comment on this as well, because I know this is going to drive into the demo. But from a selection standpoint, is once we understand that use case, we can actually enable the agents through all these different tools. So this has a bit of a Microsoft lens, but whether it's Teams, whether it's using your traditional Copilot, which is actually the M365 Copilot that most people think about when they think about Copilot with Microsoft, but there are also these kind of more pro code type tools, whether it's Copilot Studio, Azure AI Foundry, or even Fabric Data Agents. You can actually enable all these things to work together as you build, single agents or kind of those agent teams. So I don't know, Tony, if you had a comment on these as well. These are going to drive.
We'll show examples, several of these on the demo today, and probably the only thing I would suggest here is, This is a progression, so you can start, obviously the no code is the easiest, the low code, which is Copilot Studio, requires a little bit more from a technology skill set. As Jordan mentioned, Azure AI Foundry, which is the pro code tooling, is going to require some more, technical talent. But the good news is you can start at that low code and progress as you need. And like you mentioned, this rapid prototyping encourages it, and all the tools, play well together. And then Teams and the Fabric component are kind of ways to both pull data in, and then maybe places that you can publish these things, the different channels that they can be used. But yeah, this is the fun part, if we've done the homework up front, so we know what use cases we're doing and why.
Right, Tony, I'll go ahead and
great.
allow you to share your screen. And while Tony's sharing his screen, just a reminder to everyone, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them into the question box. You don't need to wait until the end. I'll be monitoring that.
So is everybody seeing my screen, Sarah? Is that coming through now, or great?
Yep.
So everybody see my iPhone there?
Yes.
Great. So what we thought we'd do today is kind of, like I mentioned, go through that progression. And so I'm going to show some examples, and the use case I'm going to use is one internally that we actually went through at Atlantic. And like Jordan mentioned, we went through the BXT framework. We had several things that scored high, but one of the ones that scored high but didn't have a huge technical complexity, so it scored well, was we have a print division at Atlantic, and that print division does a lot of printing repairs and things like that, where they're working on equipment. I think it's over 1,000 different models that we may have in our inventory with customers. And so they have to go through these basically parts manuals, figure out what part, if they're repairing a device, and figure out what piece is broken, what pieces may be related to it, et cetera. And we realized that was a pretty quick prototype that we could build to see if, hey, can we crack open these PDFs? Can a technician in the field actually query that, get the data back? And then eventually we identified some other use cases, like Jordan mentioned. Some of this becomes workflow. The ordering process for parts is a little not as frictionless as we'd like it to be. And so we started to work on that and kind of work through it. But one of the things that's really interesting too is the AI technology is now becoming something that's called multimodal, which is quite exciting because it means you don't have to just type and chat anymore. And so if you think about our service team, they're out in the field, they probably want to open up a phone, go into an application and potentially speak to it. I, as a technologist, have a similar need. So we're prepping a demo today. I'd love to tell you I do all the demo prep, but I don't. I have a team that does this for me, and we probably all have that experience of, hey, I'm getting ready to do my demo. Is everything working the way I want it to? So what I'm going to show here is I could do this on my phone, but Apple and GoToWebinar are not playing real nice. So what you're going to see here when I go and click my microphone, it's going to tell me that I can't use the microphone. So I'm doing the proverbial cheat, and I'm going to pull out the same interface. But this is exactly as it would work on the phone. So I just wanted you to see that. So not smoke and mirrors, other than my mic doesn't work. But what I'm going to do right now is I want to make sure the demo gods are smiling on us today. And Elizabeth, who's our tech specialist, has been working on this demo for me. And I'm hoping she sent me an email that says, hey, status, all things are go. But I'm just going to ask, I don't really want to crack open my email and everything else in front of you. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to ask is, hey, could you let me know if Elizabeth sent me a status email on how the Copilot demos are doing for today? And give it just as, up, continue. Yeah, if you could repeat. Fantastic. We're all systems go. So could you send Elizabeth a thank you note for me? I'll take care of it. But do you know, did Elizabeth also send over the prompts for the low code Copilot, or excuse me, the no code Copilot? Great, thanks. I got it. But a couple things to notice there. I'm having a, thanks so much. I'm going to shut it down now. But if you'll notice, we had a conversation. The voice is, very, very human-like. Elizabeth did exactly what I was hoping she was going to do in terms of building this out. So thank you, Elizabeth. But notice too, it wouldn't let me send an email. And that gets back to that kind of security and governance. So right now that Copilot is set up to not allow the Copilot to send emails on my behalf. It can suggest, it can draft, but it can't send. It is something that we could override. But hopefully this gives you this idea of having the ability to just have a conversation on your mobile device with it. But now let's jump in to the actual demonstration. And as we mentioned, Elizabeth has set up 3 things for me today. One is a low code Copilot. I'm going to start with what's called the no code Copilot, and then we're going to get into the pro code. So go from no code to low code to pro code. And you'll see the capabilities that kind of advance for that. But the first thing I want to do, I'm actually signed into, it's called the Microsoft 365 chat. This is where you get, kind of the basic chatting experience with the Copilot. And one of the things that Jordan mentioned is we want to determine the value on this. Now, we at Atlantic went through this, and we want to make sure that, hey, is this use case a good enough one for us actually to pursue? Does it have a viable ROI? And so one of the things that Microsoft's doing and a lot of the other providers are doing, they're providing these specialist agents that are just pre-built into the interface, and nothing needs to be built, nothing needs to be configured. You can just use it. One is called Researcher. Now, I won't run this because it takes a couple of minutes, but what I wanted to do here before we started to build this out is, hey, does this have a viable ROI? Can you help me? So you can see the prompt that I used there was to have the researcher go out and make sure this idea of automating the search and ordering of parts with manuals stored in SharePoint is going to have a good ROI, and not just for Atlantic, but are there industry benchmarks associated with it? And what you'll see is it returned a really good summary. It went out and kind of said, yeah, there's going to be time savings. There's going to be some accuracy improvement because you're going to get the right parts ordered. The service technicians should be quicker in terms of the number of calls they can handle per day. And you do get a very identifiable dollar-based ROI. And this is proven by other participants other than just Atlantic. So good, this hits well in terms of that BTX score. A lot more here, I won't go through it all, but this can be saved off as a Word document, an executive, or again, it can propose that email and send it over and justify it. So great news, we get to go ahead and build a Copilot. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to open up a new chat. But what we're going to do with this chat is, instead of just querying it, because like Jordan mentioned, if I just had this chat experience, yeah, I'm sure I'm getting some good answers and things, but I want to make this a little smarter than that. And I want to start to ground it on some of those documents that we've got, but I'm not a coder. I want to just basically build this agent and then potentially share it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to point it at this folder in SharePoint, which has a couple thousand documents in it, as I mentioned. Wonderful naming convention. We can tell exactly what these are by the names in the documents, right? But this is a mix of service manuals. There's some information on firmware. There's actually some firmware itself in this, and we just loaded this up into this SharePoint. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that prompt that Elizabeth has prepared for me, and I am going to create my first agent. This is now an agent that I'm going to create for me, but it can be shared with others. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go new agent. And you'll see I get this kind of vibe interface where I can start to create this agent. And all I have to do is pop in my initial prompt. And so I'll walk through this real quick. What I'm telling you to do is, hey, create a service manual, call it service manuals, go to the SharePoint site. This is the use for it. And then you essentially give it a bunch of guidelines. Pull the knowledge this way. If you get a firmware document, I want you to handle it this way. Only search here, don't go out to the website, distinguish the different types of documents, respond only in English, don't switch languages, et cetera, et cetera. And now when I hit this, what you're going to see is it's going to go off now and ground this Copilot on this information. So that was the data element that Jordan was mentioning. So we're now teaching it where those manuals are. It's getting ready to index it. And you can see it's come back with a couple things. It's telling me, hey, it's been set up for you. It even went and said, hey, here's some prompts that might make sense that I can provide as guides for it. And the good thing is it actually needs my help because it doesn't have the right icon. So I'm going to go over to configure, and I'm going to actually add a new icon here. And I'm just going to put the Atlantic A on the top of it, and I'm going to hit apply. And I could sit here and tweak back and forth and kind of work with this, but I'm going to go ahead and have it create the agent for me. And what's happening here now is it's actually building this agent. It's going to deploy it just for me at the moment. I can then test it, I can tweak it, I can iterate on it, and now I'm going to go to it. And you can see it's got the guides. These are those prompts that it created. And now I'm just going to ask it a couple challenging questions. So, and by the way, I am not a printer expert. So our service team actually came up with these queries, but that's that domain expertise that, Jordan was speaking about. I don't know what a magnetic clutch is. I don't know what an A174 is, other than it's some sort of printer or copier. But by working with the SMEs who do know, we know this is a common question for them. And so now I'm going to enter the question, and if the demo gods are behaving, we're going to see a nice response come back. It takes a few seconds, but if you think about what this is doing, it's quite fascinating. So it has gone through all of those PDFs, it's popped it open, and then it's actually found the part number, which is the AX20 2007, and I can start to ask it some more questions, because our understanding too is often our service techs need to know, are there any related parts, kind of like a car, right, that might be associated with that part that I might need to order if this magnetic clutch is something that I'm replacing. Now notice I didn't tell it what part number, I just said, can you show me related parts? So it's got memory, it's keeping track of the questions that I've been asking. And then we should come back and see a nice list of, oh gosh, this looks like this one has a lot of things that are sitting around that magnetic clutch. But you can see, again, it's gone through now several documents, and it shows me where it found all that information. But now I can give it a little twist of a question, because I'm going to now tell it, hey, I want information on a firmware for another device. So it kind of switched my question completely. And now it's going to come back not only with the reference for where the firmware is, but remember we gave that instruction that said, hey, if it's firmware, treat it slightly differently. And if you'll notice, what it's pulling back here now is not only the information on the firmware, but actually how to download it if you need to pull it down to actually put on a machine. So again, 5 minutes to build this. It's starting to answer questions. And now I get a little greedy, and I say, hey, I need that part we were talking about for the A174. Can you order it for me and ship it to my home address? And notice it can't do that. So just like that email, it's not able to order parts. And the reason for that is this type of agent doesn't have that ability, like Jordan was talking about, of agents talking to other agents. So this is just me and this agent having a conversation, working through, but this one can't take any action. So it needs another agent or two to help it with that idea of looking up the part, ordering it, finding my home address, because none of that is contained in this data. So this is a good example where we've tried no code, but because this is one of the big ROI drivers on this, we need to go to at least a low code platform. And so now I'm going to switch over to Copilot Studio. Hopefully I have that up here. Yeah, I do. And I'll just go back into the agent. And it's this one right here. Now I've done a little bit of cooking ahead of time on this one, so I've actually popped it in. But what's really interesting here is I'm now in a Copilot Studio where I can bring in other tools, but notice I use the same prompts and the same description. So everything that Elizabeth prepared with the previous one also works here. But now I've got two new things that I've added. I've got this concept of a tool and this concept of an agent. And so what this tool is going to do is it's going to place an order. Now, for right now, we're just going to do this as an email, but this could actually be an order going into an order entry system. And I'm going to go look up data that's actually setting over in Microsoft Fabric. And so in Microsoft Fabric, this is where you ground and unify a lot of your data. It's a concept called a data agent. And so over here, I've got my list of employees, and this is where the address information is at. So same Copilot, but now I've added to it 2 additional capabilities. And what's really interesting, and it was in Jordan's diagram, but it was a little hard to see, these agents start having generative AI conversations with each other. This is where it's different than a traditional workflow tool. So there's what's it called, the orchestrator, Jordan, that sits on top, and it talks to each of these agents saying, hey, I just got a request. Can you fulfill that request for me? If it doesn't, the first one says no, then it'll go on to the second one, et cetera. So we've got two agents here, one that can send emails for ordering a product. The other one can go look up the address for an information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this up in test mode. So I just do that here. And I'm going to give this one a really tough question. So I'm going to give it that same question we gave the other Copilot that it couldn't answer. Well, let's do this. Let's make sure it can still find the same part. So let's do this first. Like Jordan said, these are probabilistic, not deterministic, but let's make sure it answers the question the same way first.
Tony, I think this is a good way to show the evolution too, because it's the same business use case, but now we're using a slightly more robust technology to help.
And great, we got the exact same answer. So we've grounded this enough that it's going to give us that same answer. But now watch when I give it that question that we gave it before on this understanding of, hey, I would like you to go order and ship that part. Notice I'm not referencing the part number here. I'm saying go get me that part, ship it to Tony's address. Notice I've not given it my address either. So I haven't given it the part number. I haven't given it the address. I'm telling it to order something. And this is where the power of agents for me come in. So now what's happening behind the scenes, and we can see it over there on the left, is the agent is now saying, okay, you gave me several things to do. I got to go find that part number for the magnetic clutch. I got to go get Tony's home address, and then I've got to email the order desk to actually place the order. And that's what it just did. So it went through and it found the order. It found my address, and that beep we just heard was the email coming through. And so this is that order coming through. And if all goes well, it's actually formatted. Yeah. So this is the part. This is my address, and this is a link back to the actual manual where it found it. So imagine the time that saves. We know on our team's time, this is usually a series of phone calls and email. Somebody on the order desk has to take it. They have to text or call the rep back. They then tell them the address. Well, the rep's not going to be there at the location, so they need it shipped to their home. So somebody's got to go look that up and enter it all into the order. And we did all this through one little simple prompt that could have actually been done from the service technician's phone. And right now we have 3 agents here. So we have the orchestration agent and the 2 doers that are getting things done. I find this kind of fascinating that it can figure all this stuff out. I'm not sure I could handle that myself. So kind of the next level, and this one may not require this, but I wanted to show it so you have an idea. And Jordan, I think we even have a blog coming out on this too, that let's say that we decided, gosh, you know what, we do want to do something pro code with this, and we want to get nuts on it. We want to actually allow the service technician to take a picture of the part that he thinks broken, and then have the device, basically have the bot figure out what the device is off of that, or the part is. So I haven't built this out in full, but you can now take that low code and move it over into the pro code tooling. This is something called Foundry. This is above my pay grade, so this is where folks like Jordan, who do the deep coding and technology, live. But what's really nice here is even someone like me can take this and start to optimize that current Copilot, one, to maybe potentially make it faster, and 2, to maybe reduce the cost on it. And so what's nice when I bring it up in here, I have all kinds of options in terms of all the various models that we can use. So I think about 11,000 of these now. Microsoft has the largest portfolio of models that are available. So you can start to pick ones that have a better fit for your use case. And so one of the things I did here is I picked a lower cost. GPT-5 is the one that's out right now, but 4 is a lot less expensive. And for something like this, it's totally fine. And then I can also, over on the knowledge, which is that SharePoint site, I can put a lot more intelligence on how it basically indexes that. And I can use even a lower cost model for that, because all it's doing is taking those results and formatting it back for me. So you can use what's called one of the mini models. But again, what we can do is we can just make sure this is working the same, like Jordan said, it's a progression. And so I'm going to ask it that same kind of test case that we gave it. And I'm going to go into the agent. And I'm going to ask it the same thing. And what I want you to watch is how much faster this is. So if you'll notice, because we're using those lower cost, faster, more specialized models, and we've done some things on the indexing in SharePoint, it is really quick. And so if this was something that we wanted to make sure was a need for the service techs in the field, we might want to build it here just for that reason alone. But what I've done here is I've kind of gone through, and I took a little longer than I'm supposed to, so I apologize for that, Sarah. I get excited about this stuff, but I went from a no code to a low code to a pro code, and I'll probably turn it back over to Jordan now. And Jordan, if you want to comment any more on Foundry, feel free. But hopefully, I'll give everybody a feel for kind of how you take the use cases to actual the prototypes that Jordan was talking about.
Oh, that was fantastic, Tony. Thanks for kind of walking through that evolution. And probably just one final comment as we're seeing it from kind of the builder's lens. But one of the beautiful things about this is once you build it, the consumers can consume it where they want. So like you started, it can be through the phone on voice, it can be through your website, it can be through some of your other tools. So all the effort is really kind of in building it, and then all these different channels can be used to distribute it across both internal and external, surfaces. So really compelling stuff here. Thanks for walking through that.
Yeah, no apologies for taking longer. It's really cool stuff.
This stuff is fun. This stuff is fun. And thank you, Elizabeth, for having all systems go. So Democrats were friendly today.
Elizabeth's like, phew. All right, so we have about 9 minutes left to take some audience questions, and I'll just throw these up to Jordan, you and Tony, and if anyone else has questions that they haven't had a chance to put in the question box, go ahead and do that now. It's not too late. But the first question is, how do we figure out the right first use case for our company and who should be involved? I think, Jordan, that goes back to what you were talking about with the 4-step process.
Yeah, happy to comment on that. And this feels kind of like any sort of initiative. Is I think having representation across your different groups or departments in the room, kind of collating all those use cases. I always like to build that wish list out the gate, even though you're not going to tackle all of them. Getting all those on a whiteboard through those canvases that we talked about, and then kind of going through that BXT framework to identify those first 3, 4, or 5. And you know what, the framework may say, hey, this is the #1 choice. There may be some institutional knowledge that says actually no, number 2 or number 3 is going to have more cultural impact, et cetera. So I think to me it's just collating the list down to a short list, and then from there kind of making the executive decision on which ones to tackle first. But oftentimes we find that the folks that have just picked one out of the blue because it was the first one spend a lot of time on something that doesn't really create a lot of value, and then you lose a little bit of momentum with the organization when you launch stuff that doesn't really create that aha moment for your end user. So I would say intentionality is key here, but some of the frameworks can really help you kind of get to that point without having to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, especially that prioritization without many ideas.
Okay. I was going to mention, Jordan, we did this internally, and we had, I think, 6 or 7 AI use cases we identified that were kind of first prototype candidates. We chose this one because it had a good ROI, and it was just a good representative group in the company, so it was the right one to start, and we had the data, so it wasn't a difficult integration.
Great, thank you. That response, the questions are flowing in. So,
nice.
Tony, question for you: does all your data need to be in one place? Does all your data need to be in one place before we can start using AI agents?
It doesn't, and I showed that there. I actually had data in SharePoint. I had data over in Fabric. Probably the only caveat on that is you may want to do some, unifying and organizing of the data, especially if you've got multiple data sources that may have conflicting answers, like different time sets or something like that. So I know Jordan team will do a lot about what they call data foundation, is figuring out what data does need to be unified and organized, and what data, like documents, can be separate from that. But that's part of that planning exercise too. That drives into the complexity side of that BXT score.
Yeah, and one other comment I might add there, Sarah, too, is without that data unification step, oftentimes the AI is not great at math, kind of arithmetic, yes, summaries, adding.
Like me.
So, having that kind of, aggregation data platform that can do the math for the AI, that's often where we see the need to unify the data is, hey, what were our total orders in this given period, or what was the average over time. Just connecting the AI to that data at a high level, it often will hallucinate, or it's not able to do those types of heavy lifts. And so that's often where, if the use case dictates any sort of sum, average, min, max, that's usually a good candidate to actually unify that data first. So
yeah,
hopefully
and kind of the look, yeah, and lookups are another great example. That's the reason we put the address data in a database. If it will go, if these are very eager, and so if you don't give it a place to go look up, like addresses, and tell it this home place, it will make one up, or it will go find one out on the website. It'll go find one for somebody with the same last name but not the same first name, and so that's why you want to get that data organized and grounded. And so those probably answer both sides of that question, but yes, it can be done with data separated, but take a hard look at it, because often you'll want that unified and potentially in some sort of data structure like Fabric.
And maybe a related question or similar answer, but do you need to prepare the data for Foundry, or do you allow the program to organize the data?
Well, since it's a Foundry question, I get to pass it to Jordan because he's the expert at Foundry.
You can kind of do both. So like we mentioned with the use case, if it's just looking up data, what does this record say? What's the status? Oftentimes you can just connect Foundry right to that source. If you are going to do any sort of trending or summaries, that's where we recommend kind of prepping the data ahead of time, and often that's where a tool like Fabric can be really valuable, because they've built it to kind of stage and prepare all that data. So probably a little bit of it depends, but we often find for most companies that want to take a longer term view of this, you're inevitably going to have to get that data foundation in place. And so sometimes it can help to start there before you jump right into the AI world.
Great, thank you. Interesting question. Is Atlantic building any default chatbots for their customers through their partners?
That's a good question.
And maybe even beyond chatbots, just AI, but.
Yeah, no, appreciate the question. I know we've got a lot of the capabilities in-house,
Yeah.
So we've been looking at our roadmaps and kind of figuring out where we're going next. So probably stay tuned on that one.
Yeah.
We'll try to have answers there.
Okay, can you use, I love this one. This is what I would do. Can you use Copilot to provide a list of possible use cases?
It's pretty amazing.
Sure can.
It can help. So
yeah. I didn't show the agent, but one of the other agents that Elizabeth built is a use case agent. So it goes, Microsoft has a lot of use cases, and so it goes and looks for use cases that match your industry, match your role, and it can even go out and do some web research from some of the other publishers, vendors, et cetera. So yeah, it's a very powerful way of identifying those use cases. Now, you want to then think about your business, because obviously they're more generic, but yeah, it's a very good starting point.
Great.
And if we can find the name, happy to show, or if you have a specific industry, for whoever sent that question, we're happy to send over what the agent pulls out.
Fantastic.
Thanks for Elizabeth again. So that's another agent that she built. We have to get her on the next one to do the demo, because this is all the stuff she's been building.
Final question. Does using AI agents mean we need to buy new technology, or can we use what we have?
That's a great question. It's probably a little bit of both. So the nice thing is all the fuel for AI is likely your existing, systems of record, ERP, marketing, sales, etc. Obviously, the actual AI interfacing, there is some new technology. So whether it's the Copilot licenses or some of those platforms that Tony mentioned, probably the benefit is currently a lot of this is kind of consumption based. So you can get started at a very low price point. It's kind of use it as you pay as you use it. Obviously, you need to be wary of that and kind of understand what those use cases are going to be. But from an initial investment standpoint, with quite a little bit of investment, you can prove a lot of these use cases pretty quickly. So so a little bit of both, but definitely some exciting ways to get started without a huge dollar investment.
Yeah, Microsoft has some good content on that kind of shows, again, the progression from the free M365 chat to the paid one to then the pieces Jordan's talking about, the data platform. So if we can get that name, happy to send some of that information over.
Great. Sure thing. All right. So we covered a lot today, gave you a lot of information, and you're all probably thinking, well, where do I go from here? So basically, it's going back to write that proven 4-step approach for AI success that Jordan walked through, and starting at the beginning with the business envisioning, and that's really identifying the use cases. So what we've done is we created a landing page where you can submit your first AI use case or a few AI use cases. We'll take a look at them. And then we can schedule an AI strategy briefing where we'll review the use case with you, learn a little bit more of your overall AI goals, and then talk through the best approach, right? We learned that there's different approaches and different agents for each of the use cases. So we'll walk through the best approach based on your AI use case. So you can go ahead and either scan the QR code or visit the URL. We'll include the link in the follow-up email that gets sent to you tomorrow as well. But challenge you all, just a little bit of homework before to submit your use case, and we look forward to seeing them. Any final words, Tony and Jordan, before we wrap up?
Just very exciting. I know the word that we're hearing a lot is kind of the frontier. And what's beautiful is this technology is no longer bleeding edge or even cutting edge. This is mainstream. And so I think, like we mentioned at the very beginning, no time like now to really start the journey. It is a journey, and it will take some time to get there. But we're very bullish on the impact that this will have in the long term. And so just excited to help partner and support you on your process.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Tony and Jordan, for sharing your knowledge today. And thank you all for joining us. And again, we will send over the recording with the slide deck and a link to submit your use cases. You'll see that in your email likely tomorrow morning.
Great.
Have a great rest of the week. Bye.
Thanks, Ron.
Bye.